On our inaugural show, we talked about how in many situations when someone is facing an objective that seems overwhelming, they just don't know where to start. It just seems too big and too nasty. Well, how about finding yourself in a situation where the organization you're dealing with is $2.3 billion in debt? And how about if you're in a situation where there's so much crime in the area that you're trying to take over and get it back to a high quality of life? Do those seem like overwhelming problems to you? Well, tonight we're going to tell you the story, a very successful story of a person who walked into a situation like that and came out a very big winner. Hi everybody, I'm Marc Accetta, the host for your show, and tonight I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a subject that's close to my heart. It's not close to me anymore because I moved away from there and now I live in Dallas, Texas for about the last 20 years, but I'd like to talk to you about New York City. I grew up in northern New Jersey, about 20 minutes away from the city, and because my dad was born and raised there, I spent a great deal of time there. And I want to talk to you a little bit about something that transpired in the 1980s going into the 1990s in New York City and how one individual had a major impact on that. And basically I want to start off by telling you when I was young, probably 12, 14 years old, during the summers I was in the city all the time. My dad was a bartender and he kind of ran a pretty prominent restaurant, and he came in contact with a lot of athletes and people, so he was always getting tickets for me. So I was coming into the city and either going to Yankee games or going out to the US Open or going to concerts, and he always had some tickets for me. That was one of the perks of his job, and I was always in there. And of course my dad was working during the day, so he couldn't really be hanging out with me. So I remember just being all over the city, taking the subway, lots of different places, going all over the place, things that I would probably never allow my children to do today. But when I think about it, I just always felt safe. Here I was in one of the biggest cities in the country, and I was smart enough to know that crime was there, and I was aware, but the bottom line is I always felt loose and relaxed when I was in New York growing up in the 60s and 70s. Well, then things changed rather significantly. I remember towards the end of when I moved away, going into the mid and late 1980s into the 1990s, I remember not feeling as comfortable as an adult, which is pretty interesting. I remember even the guys on the streets who used to come up and squeegee your windshield. You know, that's not such a big deal unless you were in New York at that time and you realized that if you didn't give these guys enough money, or God forbid you didn't give them any money, they would kick your car and spit at you and scream at you and really put a lot of pressure on you and make you feel incredibly uncomfortable. And I know it's crazy to not go into a city just because you're afraid you might have an encounter at a street corner, but that's how bad it got. I mean, there was graffiti everywhere. It was just an overall heavy feeling, an overall feeling of insecurity and being uncomfortable on my part. And I wasn't alone, folks. That was when New York City was really at its lowest point. The crime rate was very, very high. The murder rate was very high. And just the quality of life in New York had probably sunk to an all-time low. Well, come into the picture in 1993, a gentleman named Rudolph Giuliani, and by now I'm sure all of you, if not many of you, have heard of Mayor Giuliani. He came into national prominence with what he dealt with 911. But before we go there, let's just talk about what happened when he came into the job. When he came into the job, the city was over $2 billion in debt and getting worse every single day. When he came onto the job, 1 in 7 people living in New York City were on welfare. He was dealing with really difficult problems, very, very high crime, and just a low quality of life. And people were very frustrated and upset. Now, if you fast forward, what he did during his time there was pretty powerful. He was able to go ahead and go from $2.3 billion in debt that when he left office 7 or 8 years later, the city was actually in surplus with millions and millions of dollars. I mean, wiping out that kind of debt and getting into profit in any business in under 10 years is pretty doggone remarkable. Not only that, he was able to cut the rate of murder and crime by 60 and 70%. So he did a tremendous job at making people feel a lot safer on the streets and restoring the quality of life in New York City. Now, if you really want to get information about how he was able to do that, that, you can pick up a tremendous book that he authored a number of years ago called Giuliani on Leadership. I've read that book on several different occasions, and I really like it because I think the stories that he tells you about how he turned the city around can really directly relate to you and your business. I know they related to me and my business. He talked about how he took the people in government who were underneath him as he was the mayor, and how he had them totally accountable. He used to have daily meetings every single morning with his inner circle, and at those meetings he was really tough about keeping people accountable, not just letting people go. He confronted issues, had crucial conversations with them all the time, and basically made the middle management people come into accountability, whereas in the past, obviously, a lot of stuff had been let go. Well, the last thing he was going to do is have the city in that shape and just let things go. So once again, what I want to talk to you about mainly tonight, as far as Mayor Giuliani and the power of one, is when you have something that overwhelming, when you're in one of the biggest cities in the world, when the crime rate is through the roof, when people don't have jobs, when you're heavily taxed with welfare, when things are just in bad shape, when crime is high and overall morale is down, what do? Morale is down, not morale. I don't even know what morale is. Do you know what morale is? We can cut that out, but instead of cutting it out, I think we'll leave it in because it just kind of gives you a little bit of a flair for the kind of guy I am. You know, why cut something out when you say something funny like that? Because this isn't necessarily a funny subject, so now we have a little bit of humor in the show because I said morale instead of morale. What do you want? So anyway, morale was really down in the city, and he was in a situation where he really had to do something about it. So this is what I really got out of this. The first things he did in order to clean that city up with its major problems is he started focusing on getting graffiti off the wall. Amazing. Now, really, graffiti, is it really that big of a deal to get the graffiti down? But the bottom line is he felt, and I read this in the book, which you will too if you read it, that he wanted to have an overall feeling of everyone in the city. He wanted to give as many New Yorkers as possible a feeling that things were going to change. So he attacked a couple of issues. One of them was getting the graffiti off the wall and keeping it off the wall and enforcing it and having serious fines in place. And you know what? He was able to do that in a relatively short period of time. And I don't know if it was a conscious thing for New Yorkers or unconscious, but the bottom line is in a short period of time, they noticed a change. They noticed a change for the better. The other thing he did is he got after the guys that I lovingly referred to here in the beginning part of this, the squeegee guys. And I'm telling you, I might have made that sound a little ridiculous to you, but it was uncomfortable, especially at nighttime, to be in the city and have these guys coming up to your car at a red light. It really was kind of out of control, not good at all. And what he did is, once again, one of his primary objectives was to get all of those guys off of the streets in New York, because the bottom line is he wanted people who were coming into the city from Connecticut, from New Jersey, from wherever. He wanted those people, and the people, of course, who lived in New York and drove there, to feel comfortable driving their cars in the city. But it was just another thing to give people an overall feeling that things were getting better. And by the way, if you read the book, it's pretty interesting. He couldn't just get them off the street. This is a little side note for you, but it's amazing how the laws of our country are and how you have to sidestep things in just the right way. So he couldn't just go in and get these guys off the street. Somehow legally they were protected and they could go out and do that and harass people. But I believe what he ended up doing is he ended up getting them arrested for jaywalking, which is really pretty funny because technically I guess they were jaywalking. And he was able to circumvent whatever the problems were and find a letter of the law that he could hold them to. And he got, the bottom line is he got the streets cleaned up. So by getting rid of graffiti and getting rid of all those guys at the street corners, and then also working on things like fixing gridlock, if you don't know that, where I don't want to get into the details of it, but he fixed gridlock in the city as well. He did a lot of little things. Gridlock is about traffic jams, and he did a great job of cleaning up all those streets because everything in New York is a one-way street, and if people don't adhere to the gridlock laws, it gets crazy driving there, and believe me, it's crazy enough as it is. Anyway, he did those three simple things and a couple other small ones that I'll leave out right now, and overall, in a short period of time, the average person started feeling like, wow, things are definitely getting better. And that gave him some momentum, and you cannot underestimate the value of momentum. So what I'd like to do is, as I shared with you, as we fast forward Mayor Giuliani's situation in New York. He was able to take $1 billion of debt, turn around. He was able to create close to 500,000 private sector jobs. He was able to do all sorts of things, have a dramatic impact on organized crime, on regular crime, cutting down the murder rate, cutting down the crime rate. He was able to get people back to work. He did a lot of overwhelmingly positive things, but it started with something small. So here's my question. In whatever you're doing right now, and whatever your challenge is right now, and whatever your goal is right now, if you have something big in front of you that you're trying to achieve, especially if you have a problem that you're trying to fix and it seems a little bit overwhelming with you, what can you learn from tonight's show? What can you learn from Mayor Giuliani as far as picking out one or two small things that are not that significant to your overall big picture? But if you were to fix these one or two small things, A, it would give you a little bit of momentum, and B, it would change the perception of the people you're dealing with so they would see that things are starting to get a little bit better. Because I'm telling you folks, those people who do not study history are doomed to repeat it, and those of us who study history and look at what other people have done are the ones who are going to take quantum leaps in our lives. I believe the expression they say is people who don't learn from the mistakes obviously are in the worst shape. You got to learn from your mistakes. People who learn from their mistakes are much better off. That's the second group. But the people who learn from other people's mistakes are the smartest ones. So what I'm saying is we really want you to come into this show every week and hear the stories we're telling you, but I don't want you to just be entertained and inspired. I want you to learn something from each one of them so we can learn from the successes people have had, we can match and model, and throughout some of these shows we're going to learn from the mistakes that certain people had so you don't have to make those mistakes, so we can go ahead and benefit and prosper by other people's situations. And I'm sure all of that makes a lot of sense to you. So once again, getting back to what I'm sharing with you right now, Mayor Giuliani totally turned around the biggest city in the United States, and he did it in a relatively short period of time by taking small steps to gain momentum. What can you do right now in your problem or in your crisis to turn things around and to get things moving in the right direction? And if you don't have a problem or a crisis, then certainly you have a goal or an objective, something you're trying to achieve. So what little things can you do in the short term that will move you towards your bigger long-term objectives? So that's a very valid thing. I want you to really work on that as soon as we're done with the show, guys. Don't go ahead and get busy doing something else. Just take 10 or 15 minutes and close the TV and turn off the radio, get off the internet, and really focus on what you can do. Because once again, my objective with this show is to drive you to action, because thoughts determine what we want, goals determine what we want, but only actions determine what you get. And I promise you, Mayor Giuliani is a person of action. When he took over New York City, he didn't just think about things, he didn't just have theories, he took action, and he took strong and immediate action. And that's why we can feature him on a show like The Power of One.